Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. Before we dive into today's episode, we have some exciting news to share. Our fall cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on September 19th, 2023, and we want you to join us. We designed the Next Economy MBA for entrepreneurs and change makers who are helping to create a world that works for all life. During this 9-month program, you'll learn practical skills on how to transform your organization into one that is just, equitable, and regenerative. Plus, you'll join an alumni community of over 500 impact leaders who are transforming organizations around the world. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro session with our facilitators. Plus, you can save 20% on tuition where you register before July 24th. Thanks for listening, and now, on to the show.
Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hello, my name is Sean Berry, and I am a partner at Lift Economy. Today, I am talking to Nia Evans. Nia is the executive director of the Boston Ujima Project. Her background is in the areas of labor relations, education, leadership, and policy. Her advocacy includes a focus on eliminating barriers between analysts and people with lived experiences, as well as increasing acknowledgement of the value of diverse types of expertise in policy. Welcome, Nia.
Thank you, Sean.
Great to have you with us today. I'd love to start by hearing some of your background and how you got interested and involved in the work that you're doing today.
Just prior to joining Ujima, I was the ED of the local branch of the Boston NAACP. Prior to that, I'd been volunteering. I'd volunteered on both our education committee and our economic development committee. On our education committee, one of the primary issues we found ourselves dealing with in partnership with community members and parents and students were school budgets and budget cuts, and just how decision-making was happening and problem-solving was happening in lieu of the reality and the necessity of budget cuts. And one of the kind of sticking points with community members and parents and students, particularly at that time, just was the lack of participation in the decision-making. So BPS, the school district, made a decision, for example, to cut yellow school bus service. Again, the reality and the necessity of budget cuts was understood, but what the tension was the process for how BPS had arrived at what to cut, as well as notification in terms of when parents were notified, for example, that these services would be cut. That was in 2015, or 2014, 2015. 2015, sorry. With Economic Development Committee, one of the things that happened at the beginning of the year was Boston, as a city, decided to bid for the 2024 Olympics. And this was a huge conversation pretty immediately at that point. And one of the things we learned at the NAACP when we checked with some of our peer orgs like Urban League and Lawyers for Civil Rights, et cetera, so orgs that advocate on behalf of Black and Brown communities, was that just as it was a surprise to us, it was a surprise to them. So again, this whole issue of decision-making, who decides what and how, and who's participating in the conversation when came up. And it came up at a very large level, at the city level. So this got me interested in what mechanism is available to community members to be able to have direct say in their communities, to be able to participate in agenda setting conversations and problem setting conversations. What we decided to do that year as NAACP, for example, was not to take a pro or con position, but to say, let's develop a new template for how planning and development happens in the city of Boston. And let's look very specifically at the role of communities of color. And again, in thinking about that and thinking about what types of mechanisms are available that allow our communities to be in these conversations as early as possible and to have real decision-making power. One of the mechanisms that I learned about was participatory budgeting. I learned that the city of Boston had a youth participatory budgeting initiative. So one of the things we were thinking about was perhaps participatory budgeting should be available to residents across the city, to not just to youth, but to everyone. And and then also became interested in community-led planning, community-led development. And so as I was searching around, the other thing that I was in the midst of was creating areas of focus for the Economic Development Committee. The NAACP, I would say, was weak in that area at that time. And so it was my thought that one of the ways we could be most helpful was to see what others were doing in the areas of economic justice. I had some criteria for what I thought made sense. So, what I thought would be particularly compelling in terms of things that were happening were initiatives or processes initiatives or processes that allowed community members to act concretely. So the other thing I was observing at the time is lots of community meetings where problems could be declared, and also lots of people then feeling frustrated, feeling some powerlessness because there wasn't a sense of, well, what are the quote unquote solutions? What can we actively do beyond just know that there are these problems? So I was interested in what allowed people to act concretely, and again, what allowed them to see the line between their input and then the decisions that were made. And so I was asking around, quite a few people were telling me I needed to check out what Aaron Tanaka was thinking about, who is a co-founder of Ujima, founder of Center for Economic Democracy, which is our fiscal sponsor. And probably I would say between three and five people said, I think, if I understand what you're interested in, you want to talk with Aaron Tanaka. So that's a good sign, I think, when multiple people point you in a particular direction. And we finally had a chance to link in 2015. Ujima is an idea on paper and it was immediately compelling to me. And I would say the two pieces that were most compelling were both the opportunity to actually invest for community members, and then even more so than that, for community members to be able to vote directly on what it is we invest in. So for me, that was to a T what I've been looking for: concrete action, actual decision-making power, actual direct say, and people could see the line between their input and the decision that was made. So transparency. And so it allowed me to go back to NAACP members as well as other community members and to say, hey, because this was also another conversation that was flowing around. You talked about wanting to have the ability to set your own agenda, not to kind of appeal to the powers that be, to be benevolent enough to hear us. You talked about wanting to be able to pool our resources together because there was recognition that one of the biggest barriers to kind of bringing about what we wanted to see in our communities was individual lack of certain resources. But there was a sense that, hey, if we could come together with a few people, we could make some things happen. So there are a group of people who are working on a vehicle that actually allows you to do exactly what it is you want to do. And for me, that key is really important because this wasn't an initiative that a couple of people who regard themselves as experts or as geniuses or people with great ideas kind of cooked up in a room by themselves, which was kind of how the Olympics conversation was happening, and then tried to get community buy-in because there should be some community engagement and they should be able to kind of check off the box to say they could do that. This was matching. We had communities who were saying, I'd like to be able to do some things in a very particular way. And I was able to actually find that in its real form and match it to those desires and say, look, this fits. And so if you want to, you can learn more about it and essentially get in on the ground floor. That's how I became involved in Ujima.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you, Nia, for the background. So you basically saw through your process with the school planning community, wasn't involved, wasn't at the ground floor, wasn't really considered, and had this idea to start a fund and an economic development based directly on community input and engagement and direct democracy. I mean, one of the things that we love, right, about Ujima is that it's the nation's first community governed investment fund. So thank you, because basically we need these in every neighborhood, right? if we're going to develop economies that actually work for people where they live and enable people to have resiliency and longevity in their neighborhood and in their communities. So yes, thank you for this very important work. So and I know we had you and Lucas Turner Owens on the podcast actually 4 years ago. So we're very, very happy to have you back. So now we'd love to hear, what's the update? How far have you come? What's kind of the new developments? And yeah, we'd just love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so quite a bit has happened in 4 years. So I believe when Lucas and I were last on, so if it's 4 years ago, that was 2019. That would mean staff-wise, I think we would have been at 3 full-time members, if I'm not mistaken, staff-wise. 3 full-time members with quite possibly 1 consulting or contracting agreement, and then also working in deep partnership with CED, our fiscal sponsor. So on that note, where we are today, and I kind of always lose count, but I want to say we're at 13 full-time members. So we've grown, and it wasn't quick growth; it was slow growth, which I think is important. So really, we saw that growth in a most pronounced fashion last year. So between 2022 and 2023, I would say our staff size almost doubled. So then between 2019 and 2022, we were at around 6, 7, maybe. So some slow growth, and then this year, as I said, we're doubled in size. So that's one big change. Also, since then, at the time, we were still in the midst of fundraising. So the fund is a $5 million fund. And since then, we met our investment capital goal in July of 2021. So $4.5 million of that $5 million is investment capital, and the remaining $500,000 is loan loss reserve. So in July 2021, we were able to celebrate having met our fundraising goal. Depending on when we spoke in 2019, so at the time, we had not yet made any investments. But later that year, so in December 2019, we successfully closed our first investment vote, which was a $100,000 investment in Federal Cooperative, I think, who is probably familiar with quite a few of our audience. So that was exciting. That was a huge milestone for us to close out that first investment vote in a worker-owned composting co-op. I would say emblematic of, I think, where many communities understand we should be in terms of businesses and communities being responsible environmental stewards, for example, and workers' rights, etc. In 2020, as we all know, we experienced an unprecedented global pandemic. Our response in 2020 was to develop the Ujima Boston Residents and Worker Care Fund. And so that was an unintentional milestone. In the beginning, it's interesting, people get really excited about an idea and then immediately think about all the additional 10 to 20 things you can do. In the beginning, we had some questions about, well, what if you all had a fund for individuals that was tied to residents? So what if there was a fund for residents of Roxbury, for example, and you could kind of set criteria around that. And our response at the time was, we love it. We're not going to start thinking about that right now. We're still early in our original idea. We want to see that through and refine that and be able to show some success on that. And then we can start to think about what other funds look like. And we're also happy to support other work in that same arena. So if there's a peer or a partner or an actor somewhere who's doing something like that, we'd happily support it. But it's too early for us to pivot. We know that life brings us moments where some plans happen sooner than later. And so this is one of those. So we did end up, as I said, creating this Residents and Worker Care Fund. And I would say for us, this was operated as a mutual aid initiative where we had 2 primary groups that we were interested in supporting: our small businesses, both employers and workers, and then our voting members. So what we set up was essentially kind of you could think of it kind of like a guaranteed income initiative where those who applied could get up to, I think we said $575, no strings. And the only requirement was you're a voting member, or you're in the Ujima Business Alliance, or you work for a business that's in the Ujima Business Alliance. And so that's how we felt we could be most additive to all of the different efforts that sprung up in the moment to support everybody. And Ujima is multi-stakeholder. And so what we pretty immediately had to contend with was, how do we see to the needs of all of our stakeholders? We have community members, we have small businesses, we have artists that we count as stakeholders. And so what we had to think through again was, how do we assess what the needs are and how do we work to support them? So that then for us became something we wanted to set up as a permanent structure, which is why I say it was an unintentional milestone. It's not as permanent as we would like it to be, because we then learned that once the state of emergency was lifted, there are different kind of tax rules that govern, what can happen in terms of grants of different types of monies. So we're still trying to work that through. But for us, we did and do still conceive it as an additional permanent vehicle that we now make available in our communities. In 2022, we had a couple of additional investment votes. So we had an investment vote, a successful one for Dorchester Food Co-op and Jazz Urbane Restaurant, which is a new restaurant that's going to be opening in Roxbury that a lot of people are excited about. And just this year, we have successfully closed another 2 votes for an investment in Kush Groove and Comfort Kitchen. What's notable about the Jazz Urbane vote that we closed out in 2022 is that's actually our first equity deal. So that was another exciting, I'll say milestone for lack of a better phrase, but it was an opportunity that allowed us to talk with our members about what equity investment is and to provide education on that. And so that was an exciting moment for us. Our investment in Comfort Kitchen includes a line of credit. So that's been an opportunity for us to introduce that to members. And since 2019, we've closed out, or since our last conversation, we've closed out 5 investment votes. We've deployed or committed to deploy just under $1 million. So $925 total so far. We are excited that, as I mentioned, with some of our investment votes, we've also had opportunities to educate our members on different types of investment products, different types of processes. We've been learning this whole time. We've been refining our processes. We've been working to streamline our processes more. And so we've been seeing that now not only are we able to make more investments, we're able to move a little more speedily. And I would say we have some real momentum and a great pace that's going right now. We are getting ready to launch 2 more votes. And this will actually be our first vote where we are actually launching 2 ballots at once. So this will be a new kind of experiment or challenge for us. And part of that is really kind of balancing how many decisions people are able to make, at what rate, what types of decisions people are able to make. So I think this is some of the kind of fascinating learning that we're undergoing as we're carrying out our processes and working to refine our processes. I think there's just one other category I want to mention. I mean, 4 years is a lot to talk about, right? I would also say a pillar of our work is our arts and cultural organizing work. It's something we were very attentive to from the very beginning, understanding our project not just as a economic project, it's also a political project, it's also a cultural project. For us, how we see the task of proposing a different way of being is we are asking people to, I would say, in some situations, change or adjust their worldviews. Perhaps in other situations, if we're kind of already aligned on worldview, really embrace possibility. So really embrace the notion that we can kind of bring these worlds into being. And so for us, arts and cultural organizing is a really important part of that. A phrase that I've used to talk about this and that I've repeated and some of my team members have repeated is, we see it as making the air that we walk in or that we move through. People have to understand where we're talking about not as fringe or as dreamy or as fantastical, but as real, as normal. And it also has to be compelling and welcoming. And so we're creating the actual air that we're moving in. And so there's just been a lot of great work we've done on that front. We have an arts and lecture series where we work to kind of excavate Black cooperative history, for example. We talk often about Jessica Gordon Emhart and recommend her book, Collective Courage, often. We started off when we launched the organization with a participatory arts granting process where we gave out $500 micro grants to artists. And that has since graduated, I think, to now, I want to say $5,000 grants to artists, as well as an artist fellowship that started off as a 1-year, $10,000 fellowship and is now a 2-year fellowship, as an example. So there's just a lot of really great work that we're doing on the arts and cultural organizing side to directly support artists as workers and entrepreneurs, as well as I said, to do stellar cultural organizing.
Nia, I want to ask, there's a very profound basis for what you're doing, right? So it's not just economic literacy, right? It's not just like a traditional economic thing. It's, to me, I'm sensing a new reality or a new culture. And I guess I'm curious to, and I appreciate the story and the founding was 2016, right? Was the
a little earlier than that? Yeah, for the sake of time, I'll say around 2014, and what I'll just say, a group of people who were studying what it would take to start a public bank. And if you want me to say more, I'm happy to. But yeah,
I'm going to invite you to say more on because so that's the seed of this concept of, hey, what would a public bank look like? What is this participatory democracy, economic development? And then here we are almost a decade later. You have investments, you have a fund, you have a staff, you have community engagement, you have this arts and culture. What's the longer vision? Like, how far out can you see, and what does that look like? And then kind of how does where we are, on the path to that? Does that make sense?
So yeah, there is some longer term vision. So one question, and I know this is not what you're asking, but this is just how we've answered this question that does get asked. So one question that I think some people naturally have is scale. And so one of the ways we've answered that, so as I said, this is a $5 million fund. We do understand it as a small fund in our world, and we do perceive of it as a pilot. Even though for some of us, $5 million is a lot of money, but we do understand that's pilot money in our world. So we are thinking about a second fund, and in terms of scale and impact, naturally we are thinking that it will be a larger fund. We're thinking it's going to be a $25 million fund. And some of the early thinking that we've started to do, right? The Ujima Fund is primarily a debt fund. I did say we had our first equity deal last year. We may be doing another one this year. We did model in some equity into the fund, but it is intended to be primarily debt. Early conversations about this next fund, the $25 million fund, has been conceiving of it as primarily an equity fund. We have also modeled some investment in real estate into this fund, and we've not yet invested in real estate. We've started to take some closer steps. So we had a real estate assembly at the end of 2021. And really that was primarily educational workshops to orient our members and community members around what's involved in real estate investing, to start to, I would say, kind of whet the appetite and provide real estate investing as a possibility, because our process right now, where we ask people to name businesses, does not easily lend itself to us learning about real estate opportunities. The average person just isn't thinking about that, and that the average person just isn't interacting with real estate transactions as much as, for example, restaurants and some of the other businesses that have been named. But that was our way of kind of letting members know these are possibilities. We want to make these types of investments. And I say that to say our thinking is this next fund will also be primarily focused on real estate. One of the kind of origins that I've shared before with Ujima is Boston was experiencing and continues to experience what many communities in the U.S. experience, which is gentrification and displacement, lack of affordable housing. There's quite a bit of work to be done just in the arena of land and housing and real estate, which is why we're thinking this next fund is going to primarily focus on that. We have our peers like East Bay East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, for example, that we've been looking at it and that we've been studying, and that we've also been inviting our peers in Boston to learn about, for example, because I don't think at this point right now there are not too many orgs that can be doing that work. The scale, speaking of scale, of that problem is tremendous. So we are thinking about that as we think about what's next for Ujima. I think there are going to be a couple of deals we're going to be able to do with this fund, but we really want to, I think, set up the next fund to have a heavy, if not primary, focus on real estate. We started a translocal membership, and where that relates to kind of seeing far out is our translocal membership program is a program we created to be responsive to communities who are interested in creating something like Ujima where they are. We are focusing on Black communities particularly. It is our sense that when Black communities are reaching out to us, it is from a similar place of kind of urgency and need that Boston formed Ujima, and less curiosity, which we have people reaching out who are kind of curious. They've heard about the fund or the org, and it's interesting. They just want to know a little more, but there may not necessarily be that urgency. And so we get a lot of inquiries, which is good. That lets us know we're doing some good work, and this is some of the right work. We still have a lot of work to do, and to be able to kind of balance being responsive to other communities, we have to kind of assess what was coming in. And so we said for those inquiries, again, that we think are rising out of some immediacy and some urgency, we want to be as supportive a partner as we can be in working with those communities to actually concretely get something done. And so we created the translocal membership. And I think that's another way we think about scale, is to see something like Ujima in another place, not a replica, not an imitation, but something, and I would say an ecosystem approach that makes sense for that community. And so when we see out ahead, I would say we see, at least in the US, for example, a country that is populated with economic democracy initiatives, processes, groups. And so we want to work to do our part to build that. The last thing I'll say in terms of when we see far out ahead, so I've talked about kind of scale within Ujima. I've just talked about scale kind of outside of Ujima, so across the US. I think the other thing we think about is who. So we recently just started a public service membership, and this is oriented towards people in government who are working to support economic democracy initiatives where they are. And so we're also thinking about what it looks like for different actors with different roles and different functions to understand that they can have a role in building economic democracy ecosystems where they are, and in supporting infrastructures across the US. So we see, for example, then not just grassroots orgs like ours participating, but also government actors participating, different types of organizations and other actors participating.
Well, yeah, thank you, Nia. I mentioned to you before, I'm really inspired by the Ujima's, one of the premises, right, of systemic problems require systemic solutions. Yeah, I just appreciate this. It's not only just locally, right, where you're at, and involving the community and helping create this economic democracy engagement and solutions where you are locally, but then also, right, systemically, it's not just it's not just Boston, it's the whole nation, the whole world. So digging in, doing your work local, but then also with an eye across the movement, to support the movement, to stay connected to the movement, and to scale. I love this idea of, you're not scaling to get huge and to dominate, right? You're scaling to replicate the solution and then help the other groups adapt to their circumstances, right? So it's not the exact same solution, but it's like the process as a solution. Beautiful. And you mentioned East Bay Prec. Who else, Center for Economic Democracy, of course, but who else is kind of in your cohort of peers in that movement that you would mention and you get, inspiration from?
Yeah, so our translocal, we have two translocal members right now. So the first is Kensington Corridor Trust in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I know they're fundraising. I'll say that. People should check them out. The other is Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative in the Bronx, New York. Those are two translocal members. Another fund that we're supporting that's not yet a translocal member is Black Farmer Fund. We love Black Farmer Fund. I believe they've just put out their offering memorandum and they're taking in investments. They're doing some pretty amazing work. The Black Farmer Fund is, I want to say, definitely the state of New York. I don't know if they conceive of the Northeast as their region, but
I think it's New York State specific.
Okay,
right?
so it's New York State specific. Okay,
I know they're incorporated in New York State.
Yeah, and I just wasn't sure if maybe they had since expanded, but definitely New York State. Definitely New York State. Others that we look to. Shoot, now that it's time to kind of do the list, I'm drawing a blank, but there are definitely others. Boston Impact Initiative is a local peer here.
Right.
Another peer is Runway Project, and I'm just smiling because I always want to say Project Runway, but I'm sure that's a common mistake. So Runway Project is another peer of ours. I appreciate.
That's Jessica Norwood, right?
That's Jessica Norwood. Yeah.
Out of Alabama.
Yeah. Pot Liquor Capital, Mark Watson, who was at BII before. Just, I would say Mark Watson as a person in general. I'm really kind of bad at analogies and metaphors and parallels, but I feel like there's got to be a pop culture reference to someone who has a lot of jobs. I feel like that's Mark Watson. So I think he has his hands in quite a few funds. He's advising a few funds. And, Black Farmer Fund, for example, is one of them. So I think kind of whoever he's working with, because he really knows his stuff, we want to pay attention to. Yeah, I think I'll pause there because I know there are some people on Seed Commons. Have to mention Seed Commons. We're members of Seed Commons. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Seed Commons, maybe Cooperation Jackson.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Cooperation Jackson all the time. So we've adopted our assembly practice directly from Cooperation Jackson. Yes. Thank you, Sean.
So there is a movement, right? We can look around and say, hey, there's some...
Much more, yeah.
And each group is kind of advancing, a piece, but we're all kind of benefiting, right, from this movement. I want to ask you and kind of highlight, what are some of the staff practices, right? So now you said you're 13 and you have this ecosystemic approach and understanding, but how do y'all treat yourself and each other while you're doing this important work? And what are some of those practices and principles?
Yeah, I appreciate this question. So here I definitely want to give a shout out to our Chief of Staff, Community and Culture, James Van Boy. So many of the care practices that we try to apply internally, he sees to create to make sure we're attuned to them. So one is we have seasonal breaks. So every season we all get a week off, the same week off. And some people, every now and then we may have a person that kind of says, well, maybe I want to do a different weekend. So, I'll volunteer to kind of do some work this week and I'll do a different week. But we have that. And we've been doing that since 2020. Is that correct? Yeah, since 2020, we've started our seasonal 1 week break.
Can I ask, do you do it, is it on the solstice, equinox? Is it on the quarter? Like, how do you pick that seasonal break? Is it just when it works out?
Yeah, just when it works out. That's an interesting question. Yeah, because I don't think they're ever equinox. So, for example, our next one, if I'm remembering our calendar correctly, is going to be July, and so that'll be our summer break, and that'll be the week of the 3rd. So coincides with the 4th. Sure. So I think we find that some of them may kind of coincide with some of the holidays, but it really is kind of what works best for everyone's schedule. We all calendar them. We calendar the breaks together. So that's one. Another is the month of August is rest month. for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Oh.
what that means is no external meetings. So we're still working, but we do not schedule external meetings. It's an opportunity for us to look inward a little bit more. It's not like we're not ever looking inward, but it's an opportunity for us to kind of look inward a little bit more, do some planning. It's also a month where people can also, and I would say kind of are encouraged to pursue passion projects. I think James will be fine with me saying this, but he wants to start a record label, for example. So yeah, so he, would kind of see that, not that he would be doing it any
Nice.
other time, but at a particular time where he should maybe kind of dig in on the project. It's also a month where we don't have member meetings. So we're also giving our members a rest. So we don't do political and education workshops or member team meetings that month. And so that's the month of August. We really kind of know that we encourage what we call kind of like a non-performative and an anti-assimilation professionalism. We are a workplace, so decent behavior, decent and civil behavior should abound, and people should be comfortable in their own skin. No one should wear suits if they don't want to. If you wear a suit if you want to, don't feel like you need to. So that's kind of the non-performative professionalism that we talk about. So there should be, I'm trying to find the right word. I mean, I'm saying decent, but I feel like there's a better word. And then for us, we're a Black-led organization. We're all Black. So when we kind of talk about this notion of the anti-assimilation professionalism, it's just, I guess I would say it's us kind of being attuned to and thoughtful about the different ways Black people in our country have been told we are wrong and kind of devalued. So, really examining, I guess I would say, some practices that maybe seem like they are kind of norms of professionalism. When you actually scrutinize them, you see where, yeah, it actually comes from a place of kind of devaluing Blackness. And so, when I say anti-assimilation, just our team, I would say kind of embracing Blackness and being unafraid, being unapologetic in our Blackness, embracing our value. That's another thing that we talk about. We believe in very regular feedback. So we all have, when we do our one-on-one check-ins with each other, part of kind of our performance appraisal system, so to speak, is they all start with mutual feedback sessions. So we don't do the kind of, heavy pressure, intense, once a year kind of quarterly process. But our sense is we should always be learning. We should always be assessing. And so feedback is regular. There are no surprises, and feedback includes positive feedback as well as critical feedback. So I would say those are some of the ways we try to, show care for ourselves and each other inside the organization. We have a professional development budget. So we announced our MOU with Lyft Economy, for example, where, we're working to have our team members understand that their learning and their development and their goals are important. And so where we have a role, we want to fulfill our role. So we have started to kind of formalize just regular ongoing professional development opportunities for team members as well.
Well, thank you, Nia, for sharing some of that. Again, with the depth of your systemic approach, just wanted to highlight that you're looking at both your personal and collective interior development as well, which again, we realize is so important. So thank you so much. And, as we move to close, I'm so grateful we had some more time with you today. Is there anything else you would share with our listeners? For example, how they might help or support you?
Yeah, sure. So for sure, check us out, ujimaboston.com. I'll give a shout out to our Director of Communications, Culture, and Enfranchisement, Sierra Peters. Just revamped our whole website recently, and it's beautiful. Dynamic and beautiful. So definitely, for sure, check out the website. One of the primary ways, I would say kind of one of the easiest ways to connect is to consider joining as a member. We're working on how we orient new members so that people coming in can better understand all of the different ways they can participate and contribute, however they'd like to. So Ujima, as I think, as this probably clear, is pretty multifaceted. And so while it is really compelling, we also understand it can be overwhelming. So we're working on how we, just kind of orient people better. But I would say anyone can become a member. If you're a resident of Boston proper, you become a voting member. Anyone else can become a solidarity member. So I would just start there, and feel free to sign up to join our mailing list, because you'll definitely have regular opportunities to see and hear about what we're up to. And then from there, decide, how you'd like to jump in and join us.
Well, thanks so much, Nia. We really appreciate your work. We appreciate being in community with you, and we appreciate the wonderful change that you're making there in Boston. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Hi, Next Economy Now listeners. Erin here from the Lyft team. Have you ever asked yourself, how do I live an abundant life in integrity with the massive ecological and social crises facing our world? How do I feed myself, achieve personal security, meet my material needs, all while keeping in alignment with my values and working to build a world where others are able to get their needs met too? If so, we designed Next Economy Living for you. On June 9th, we'll be hosting our first ever Next Economy Living event. It's designed to be a conversation around how this journey of deepening personal security and resilience practices is deeply in harmony with a vision for a more just world. In this free 90-minute conversation, we'll discuss living minimally, saving resources collectively, and building food security block by block. You'll walk away with resources and templates to take the next step on your own journey, and a group of compassionate fellow learners to encourage you along the way. Are you ready to join us? Sign up today at bit.ly/Next Economy Living.